Nothing going on.
The recital going, band concert or something. Well, welcome to another Bother the Father. We're here at a lovely Tuesday night, kind of bright here in the pergola, but still good. We're also got our kids coming in for a recital tonight, so it's going to be pretty busy around here. But open up any questions anyone may have. Go ahead and start shooting.
Me.
Go, Kate.
Okay, and like I said, it's just because I know I'm working through a lot. But is it natural, normal, proper that I would realize something and then still push against it? You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I
So,
realize a fault or an error or
okay.
sin, and because I am who I am,
You want to justify it?
no,
No.
I just don't want to correct it. I know
I see.
I
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
my heart says, no, this would be good if you fixed it.
Uh-huh.
But the rest of me is like,
Yeah, so I think that's something that people experience a lot when it comes to sin. So that's why I think we have habitual sin. There are certain things that hey, really, there are certain things I think that people confess over and over again because of what you're talking about. So in other words, if one were coming to confessional and say, okay, blessed Father, for our sin, it's been 2 weeks of my last confession.
okay, thank you.
One thing I really struggle with, Father, is forgiveness. I hold grudges. It's hard for me to really kind of forgive people. This is something I'm struggling with. Okay, well, I can still absolve you because of the contrition. Given your confession, you're obviously contrite for not being as forgiving as you can. The counsel could be something to help maybe overcome that. But that doesn't mean you're going to overcome it completely, right? So one of the gauges we have in the sacrament of confession is how well we're working with it is, okay, am I taking steps to get better at it, right? Or am I maybe strategizing ways that can maybe avoid those occasions of sin, or when they do occur, deal with them better, right? We're not perfect in that. None of us are, right? But am I trying to take steps to do better in it? That's kind of, I think, an important question, more so than, okay, I know this is wrong, I just don't want to change it. Well, that could be a part of the problem too, because that could show, well, maybe I'm not really contrite for it, right? See if I can come confess it. I can say, okay, I am sorry for this, but I really don't want to change it. One of the great theologians, I think, kind of expressed what you're expressing now, Kate. Saint Augustine wrote this beautiful book, well, actually more of a tome, called his Confessions. Yeah. So in it, he talks about his struggles with chastity, right? And he had this prayer, which I think is a human and awesome and wonderful prayer and true. He says, Lord, grant me chastity, but not yet. Right? Because what it kind of shows is I'm not there yet. I want that. I want to be free of this. I want to grow in my faith and grow in my maturity and grow in that. But you know what? I am clinging to this for some reason. And I think, but
That's the word that I couldn't come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Because that shifts everything to,
Well,
instead of this, I literally, even if my hands are still touching it,
Yeah.
I don't want that.
Right.
I don't want that grass.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
I'm gonna die if I don't keep that.
Right. Yeah, and I think we experience that in these habitual sins often. And so I think we have to follow what Augustine did. What did Augustine do? Well, he recognized that he didn't have any power over it. And so he basically offered up to the Lord and said, I'm going to put this in your hands because I know I can't do anything about it. And that's sometimes easier said than done. Most people who, it's interesting, I just got done reading a book about Father Ed Dowling. I don't know if anyone knows Father Ed Dowling. He lived in St. Louis. He actually grew up in the Baden neighborhood here in St. Louis, around the late 19th century, early 20th. He became a Jesuit, right? And he was kind of known not as the founder, but the spiritual director for Bill Wilson. who founded the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so this biography, kind of biography of his, kind of talks about his interactions with Bill Wilson and how he helped him kind of develop these things. But I think that what he found was so interesting was how the 12 steps coincided with the discernment of spirits by St. Ignatius of Loyola. And whether you're talking about, whether spiritual school you're talking about, one thing we have to understand in overcoming these moral issues that we have is we have to recognize we have no power over them, especially these habitual ones that we tend to fall into all the time. It has to be letting go and saying, Lord, I'm going to let you work here. Now that's scary, right? Because sometimes too, what happens is we develop an identity with that sin. There's a fear that if I give this up, what does that mean for me?
I asked you that a few weeks ago. Who am I now that I'm not Kate?
Well, you're still Kate.
Well, you know, there's the bodily form
Sure,
of Kate.
of course, right, yeah.
It's
right,
forever
yeah.
going to be
Right. Well,
at
and
odds. And then there's spiritual Kate
right,
who really does want
right. So
something.
I think the answer that I would give to anybody, whether that's prior to becoming Catholic or you know, where they are Catholics, is, well, you are a beloved child of God. By your baptism, that's just what you are, objectively. That doesn't mean we always live up to that obligation or that glory and that grace. But that just goes to the radical love that God has for us. That no matter what, God's still going to be there for us, not abandon us. And all we need to do is just say sorry. That's one of the beautiful things about God. I often talk about, and I think I'm going to talk about this in RCA, that, you know, when we look at our relationship with God, it's really actually abusive, right? What person in their right mind would take such abuse that we do something? If we were to do to another person, we do to God, meaning scourge him and pierce him and berate him and spit upon him. Anyone else in their right mind would be like, I'm done. But God is not of that nature. As a matter of fact, he actually takes it upon himself and even bears it for our sake. There's a humbling in that, and there's actually like kind of it is like a conviction in many ways, and it should, right? That's how we actually grow. And that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. That's not what God is asking of us, right? He doesn't want the perfection. He just wants the growth, right?
Brian.
Yeah. Because I think that's the other thing too, we kind of forget, is oftentimes talk about relationships. Sometimes the most powerful loving thing we can say to someone is, I'm sorry. That really strengthens a bond that we have with somebody. Because it's a recognition that, oh, I offended you because I love you and I don't want that. Right? So yeah, I think that we have to do that often.
I share a prayer I've been saying with Kate. Kate, this is a prayer that I don't know if it makes a whole lot of sense, but I say it anyway. So God, grant me the graces to deny myself, pick up my cross, and send to you. I say that over and over again. And even with things like you're saying, you know, things that you're doing, you know that they are not pleasing to God, but you know, you don't want to not do it. You just have this maybe habit, maybe an addiction, whatever. And so I would keep saying, God, grant me the graces, because I can do nothing without you. You know, the first attitude. I can have nothing without your help. So I'm asking for your graces to deny myself, pick up my cross, and follow you. And say that over and over again. And if that for somehow, some way, helped me along. Okay, because I think there's that humility in there. You know, God, I need you. And I'm humbling myself before you. I'm asking for your mercy and I'm asking for your help. I think ultimately that's what God wants from us. He wants to show us his mercy and his forgiveness. two pillars of Christianity, right? Resolving, asking for forgiveness, and charity. If you do those two things, you're going along. Okay?
Thank you.
Anyway, I just share that with you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think there's aspects of sin that I think we always have to keep in mind too. Like you mentioned addiction, and I think sometimes that gives comfort that when we're in states of addiction, they actually reduce our culpability in many ways. So we talk about these habitual things. Well, God understands that, right? That sometimes we don't have this authority or this control over it. And so you could argue that's not truly a mortal sin, at least because I'm not giving my full consent, my full deliberation in it, right? But that doesn't mean we can't do better at it, right? That doesn't mean we can't like grow in it. And that's kind of what the struggle may be is that, well, sometimes it gets overwhelming and gets to the point where I'm tired, right? And that's where the evil one starts to work more against us. So with that though, I think one thing I've recognized, and I don't do this perfectly either, but finding balance in life to actually take time for leisure is helpful in that, right? Because when we're in a state of unbalance, that's when the evil one's going to work the most against us, right? So it's in that state of despair or tired or anxiety or stress that this evil one's going to say, well, hey, you know what? I have an easy way you can overcome this. Just go back to your old routine, right?
Every day.
Yeah, right. Sure.
And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm learning a different thing.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but now Satan doesn't just automatically let go.
No, he's going to find other ways.
He
Yeah.
still has
Right.
the
Yeah. I mean,
nails.
and that's important to keep in mind too, that there's a way that we can maybe find a strategy that works even for a time. But also, evil's crafty. He's cunning. He can try and find other ways to kind of get into us. So that's why balanced life is really important with that. I think the other thing too to recognize as well is the necessity of sacraments involved, right? That frequent reception helps us, gives us this position to grow in those things and receive them. And the other thing to keep in mind too, when it comes to these habitual sins, it's not only about our spiritual life, but also happiness here on earth. That we look at these things like, well, if I'm pursuing happiness, well, you know, that extra cheeseburger is going to give you some happiness, or that extra bottle of wine, or that extra hit on the internet, or on whatever it may be. Well, that's just a lie. And oftentimes, I think when it comes to spiritual life, the moral life, I should say, it's important to name the lie. Right. So, in other words, okay, you're telling the world something's telling me that if I do this, I'll be happy. But I've already been there, and I know that I'm not. So that tells me that wouldn't be the key to happiness. What is? Well, it's offering that up in sacrifice, taking that time to say no to that for something better, and not just saying no to it, but also replacing that with something better too. Whether that be community, whether that be relationship, whether that be prayer. That's really the idea, is that we wanted these things actually truly give us fulfillment and charity and love, and reject the things that actually keep us away from it.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned letting go of one, but filling it with something else. So way back, I used to do a lot of quilting and stuff, but I've been going through my winter scarves. And I have some beautiful tapestry scarves, but they're old. They're coming unraveled. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, that kind of makes sense. You take out broken threads, reweave or
Sure.
do
Yeah.
to where it's not just fixed,
Right.
but it is in some way made more beautiful.
Yeah. I think Jesus kind of talks about that in the gospel. He talks about, you know, the old wine and new wineskins. You know, I mean, you know, just doing the same thing over and over again in the same old way, it's going to cause your skins to burst, right? And that's why we have to look at these new ways of doing things, and not just, Yeah, it's easy to say, I'm gonna give this to you, Lord, but also we have to take strategies in order to actually, put something God-like in there, right? To renew that, yeah. So yeah, that's a struggle for everybody. That's kind of the nature of sin. The real issue with sin is you actually are choosing the good in sin. If you weren't, you wouldn't do it, right? The problem is we don't necessarily deliberate and put the proper order of those goods. And we tend to choose a lower good in place of a higher one. Right. So yeah, it's true. I mean, it's true that they're these things we call sin, it does give us some comfort for a little while. But then we tend to find out that when after some time passes, we find out we're unfulfilled. And actually, boy, we're really chose the wrong thing anyway. And that's kind of where the sin is that the fact we haven't recognized properly the higher good that God's trying to give us. That makes sense.
Yes. And I'm in my mind drawing a line and saying, okay, or so left would be a negative anything, everything, and right would be of Jesus.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
So
yeah.
then for me.
Yeah.
Everything's about me. No. So then my goal on a daily basis would be, once I've decided and discovered where my line is, I have to practice this kind of curve.
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy. I mean, if that works for you, good. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just more like, I think to me, the struggle would be like, okay, let's say something very extreme. Let's say you have a coworker that gives you a lot of grief, right? Okay, well, you know what? It would be very easy for me to just kill that person, right? That would get rid of my problem. I wouldn't have to worry about this person, like, be in my sight and give me this grief anymore. I'll just kill him. That's easy. Done. Great. But the problem with that is that may be a good as far as you maybe find some relief. But that good does not outweigh the bad that you're doing and taking human life, right? And so that I think that's kind of where it comes down to when we talk about the nature of sin. It's, well, okay, where's that line? I have a problem that's keeping me from either receiving God or keep me from certain happiness, right? Because it can be in that respect too. Okay, I have this person that maybe really tests me in ways that cause me frustration and consternation. Well, all right, there are ways you can say, I'm just going to avoid you and cut you off completely. Well, that could be a possibility. That also could be moral. But I think what Jesus calls us to do is actually engage that person, help them to see the face of Christ in you. And that is a much harder thing to do than just say, I'm going to cut you off and say no. Wouldn't necessarily be sinful to do that. I'm not saying it would be. Right. But also, is that really the way to get to heaven?
Because that will hang over your head until you either face the person or
True. But I mean, it also has to be discernment involved with that too. And this is truly discernment, not a moral decision. Because there could be a level of saying, well, what can I really do? Is it good for me just to maintain in this miserableness with this relationship, knowing that I can't really convince this person otherwise? Or would it be better for me just to pray for them, wish them a good, and move on? That's discernment, right? One could argue, though, well, maybe it's actually more sacrificial for me to maintain that relationship and that's actually a way for me to suffer. And I should maybe accept that, right, as a gift from God. Sure. We call that heroic virtue. And that's what leads to canonization for many people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's moral. I mean, that's different from a moral decision, right? The moral decision would be like, yeah, I can kill the person and get rid of them. I don't have to worry about it, right? That would be the moral decision, right?
a priest talking about murder. Oh,
I mean, it's always good to look at the
Yeah.
experience so you actually understand the actual
Should the
significance.
Monsignors be warned?
Yeah, right. No, I always use that example with the kids just because it puts them in such extreme they can understand. Because you know you want to make sure you understand the black and white first before you get into the gray, right?
Well, I have a question about the obligation to heroic virtue.
Okay, now to be fair, before we start, we don't have an obligation to heroic virtue.
Can I ask my question now, because I have to leave?
Okay,
They're
sure,
very specific, and I just have one question.
sure.
Okay, here's my question. It's very specific backstory. I have a sister who married to a man. They have two children who, one of the children's grown up now. He got married, and they have a child, a 2-year-old child, not what, 2-year-old, I think.
Great.
Anyway, they live in Oregon. And I just found a little while ago that they have not baptized the baby. And apparently, my sister's very distraught about this, but both of her sons basically are pagans. Okay, they're atheists, and they don't believe in. Obviously, they don't believe in baptism. Even though they were raised Catholics, they do not believe in baptism, whatever. So this child is unbaptized. My question is this: I've been thinking a lot about this. Okay, here, when they come to St. Louis, and would be, I would say if I find myself alone with this 2-year-old, could I sneakily baptize him? You know, put water over his head, say a little prayer, and say, "You are now baptized."
Well, that would not baptize the child.
So you're not be baptized.
No. So the baptized now here. So the question is, if I were to take water, pour it over the child's head, and say, "I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit," would that be a valid baptism? Yes, it would. Now, if you're asking me, should you do that? My answer would be no. Because even for me to baptize a child, even though I'm an ordinary minister of the sacrament, anyone can baptize anybody. But as an ordinary minister of the sacrament, what I have to do for not for validity, but for legality, I can't just take a random child that I know is not baptized and baptize them regardless. What has to happen is at least indifference on the part of the parents. So in other words, mom and dad, I don't really care if baptized or not. That's fine with me. Whatever, fine. Okay. The next question I have to ask myself is, okay, part of this obligation of baptism, though, is that somebody has to take responsibility for raising the child in faith. If it's not the parents, that usually would fall on the godparents. Okay, well, if that's in place, okay, fine, we can do this. So your question is can you do it? Yeah, you could. Should you do it? Not without at least the indifference of the parents being no.
Okay, so how can I find out if they're indifferent? I'd have to
Well,
talk to my sister.
Yeah, the only way would be to ask them. Because so I empathize with you, Paul, because I have the same situation in my family. I have a sister who has 2 children, not baptized yet. Now, when my parents ask them, they're basically saying, "Well, we're gonna let them grow up and figure it out," or whatever. So I know I have not had the opportunity to actually engage in this conversation with them because I think partially they didn't want to have the conversation with me. I think that's part of it, but also too, I think it would fall on deaf ears because not only am I the only older brother, I'm also the priest. So it'd be like, you have to say this stuff. Okay, fine. But I think that's something that my parents struggle with. That they've also often been like, "Man, I just pour some water over her head right now." And yeah, you could, but you shouldn't.
Even if there is close relationship with the parents.
Even there's close relationship with parents, because
Okay.
not only it has to be both parents, right? If both parents are around, there has to be at least indifference on the part of their parents. But the second question I have to ask myself is, okay, at least the parents are indifferent. Good. But who's going to take responsibility of raising this child in the faith?
But if the grandparents, which wouldn't apply to your sister, if the grandparents are close by and very
Sure.
close with the child,
You can make that argument. Make that
but
argument.
it's an argument.
My
It's
fear
arguable.
would be if this child were to be next year,
Great,
which is
okay.
3 years old.
Yeah, so we want to make
Of
sure,
course,
yeah.
the way I understand it, according to Catholicism, she would not go to heaven. She'd
Whoa,
go
whoa,
to
whoa,
limbo.
whoa, 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 whoa. Not necessarily. Because
Not
here, okay,
necessarily.
because here's the thing about this. We have three ways the sacrament of baptism is given, right? So sacramentally, and we're assured of that grace. We know for sure that if someone receives that sacrament, they are a child of God. They receive that grace. Good. Baptism to be conferred through blood, meaning someone dies for the faith, right? They're martyred, even though they wouldn't be baptized. God would still provide that grace for them because of that action they've done. And the third way is baptism by desire,
But
right?
that's on the person,
That's on the individual
Yeah.
person themselves, right?
child,
Right.
especially that young,
Right.
doesn't have that ability.
But you could say that because of your desire or your sister's desire for that child to be baptized, if they were to die in that state before they actually reach the age of reason, God would provide that grace for them too.
So the ones near her,
Mhm.
would have to pray for her and desire for her to be baptized.
What I'm saying is that's probably already present, and the fact that you want this for her and your sister wants this for this child, so that if they were to die in that state, I would imagine God would still provide that because of your desire and your sister's desire for that child.
Is there a specific prayer I have to say?
Not for desire, no.
Why,
Right.
why desire?
Right. Well, and
Okay.
we that tends to come into play when we talk about like, okay, well, can atheists go to heaven? Sure, they can. Right. Of course they can. But they show that desire by the actions they do on earth. So in other words, if you have an atheist that does good work, they're doing good for the world. Well, that shows an implicit desire for the grace of baptism, even though they don't maybe not can't actually verbalize it or even know what that is. And God, because he's a merciful, loving God, he would not deny that to somebody who at least even implicitly would want that grace.
Well, then what about a Catholic that's been baptized but no longer practices their faith?
That's the trouble, right? Because okay,
They are a good person while
the
they're.
question though would be, do they know better or should they? So in other words, if a Catholic that's been baptized, let's say they were baptized, but also they didn't necessarily go through all the sacraments. And let's say at some point, let's say in fifth grade, they say, this is all hooey, I'm done with this, whatever. Well, is that their fault or their parents' fault? First off. Now let's say it's later in life. Let's say this person turns in their 20s and goes to college and says, I'm done with all this, baloney, I'm done.
Right.
Okay, well, should you have known better? Meaning, were you well catechized to actually know the truths? Right? Maybe not. There could be a valid argument against that in this day and age. But then the question is, should you have? In other words, you have enough there where you could have at least kind of gone deeper and asked the questions that maybe you were struggling with. Or was this an act of laziness? Or see, that's where the character
So
of the
that's
soul
where God knows.
right. That's where the character of the soul comes into play. I can't judge it objectively,
Okay.
but God could. Right.
Yeah. My struggle
I have,
about someone
I got
else.
these number 7.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, so, the desire, pray for the girl.
Pray, definitely pray for
I'll
the
pray
parents.
Pray for the
her.
girl and
Yeah.
the parents,
Right,
and hopefully a desire.
right. But I would say, can you? Yes. Should you? No.
Okay,
Until you get that clarified.
so desire, so she'll go to heaven instead of limbo. All right, thank you.
All right, Paul.
My
I have questions.
favorite atheist who is an amazing person who has done good all of his life, started out as a Marian brother. So that is rejection, and
Yeah.
maybe even not atheist, maybe agnostic, but an extremely learned man. So that's really turning his back.
Yeah. Could you say that he should have known better?
Yeah.
I would imagine. But even again, okay, what is the cause here? What's the source? Well, what actually happened to the point where they maybe like lost
Yeah.
this understanding?
Yeah.
I mean, that God would understand that. But also like that's why like I at least can appreciate an agnostic standpoint. I at least can understand like, if you're coming from an agnostic approach, Meaning, I just don't know. I can at least appreciate that because okay, there seems like there's openness there.
Yeah,
I think the struggle with the agnostics though is that, well, you're never going to get a definitive answer, at least not in this world. So would it make more sense to at least put your trust in something?
well, whose theory is that? I can't remember.
Well, Albert, I can't remember if it was Einstein or maybe it was even, I know Einstein actually wrote this too, was that it's better to believe in a deity because if you believe in a deity and you find it wrong, you've actually left a good mark on the world to actually help and it's beneficial.
Yeah,
And if you're right, well, then you reap all the benefits. Otherwise, let's say if you don't believe in a deity and you're right, well, you just die anyway, so there's no real point. And if you don't believe in there is, you're in worse trouble than you were before, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
so that's why it's more of a calculus there to say, well, it's better to believe in one than not.
And
In reality,
a man I worked for who I was very, very fond of, and he died of brain cancer. He was a Bible thumping atheist. I mean, he loved nothing, and I have a cousin like that, loved nothing better than to point out all the wrong things. He had a good relationship with a Jehovah's Witness woman because he loved telling her how
Yeah.
wrong she was. And one day we worked in his house. One day, I come to the office and he is on the porch just arguing like crazy about this is wrong, that was wrong. So I said hello and went up to the office. 10 minutes later, he has a grand piano. He's serenading her and her youngster with Bible with hymns.
yeah.
And oh, he was devastated when she died. I said, well, Saint Augustine, she's praying for you in heaven. She's going to get your sorry behind in heaven because she's got nothing else to do. But I would argue with him. I would say, Carl, you're going to make eternity longer for all of us. I said, Jesus is going to throw open his arms. He's going to say, Carl, come on. I could have made
Right.
things easier for you.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think if you are that vocal, what I think is like with the other guy, he goes to funerals, he goes to baptisms in his family. He's indifferent to what other people feel, but he's respectful.
Mhm.
And so with Carl, I just felt like, and I told his caregiver because he died there and it took a long time. I said, Jesus and Carl will work it out.
Yeah. I
You
think
don't have to deal
yeah.
with it.
that kind of indicates there's that there's always these like saints and saint makers, and I think what we look at these, we look at people that kind of do that. I think that we have to look at that as an opportunity for this. They have the choice and say, yes, I do now choose. That we merit to them, I think, right?
Well, and he grew up Methodist. This is the fun part. He grew up Methodist. He was gay. And when he was 18, he went to visit the minister to tell him why he in the church anymore. He felt he owed him that much respect. And then he had that same minister marry his mother, and then he came and married his sister. Anyway, but I would say to him, maybe you should think about it in the other direction, because he was very brilliant. But I just feel like anybody who's that passionate about not believing isn't finished.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's almost, you almost have to ask the question, like, who are you trying to convince?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the thing about it. Like, it's like, I often find when I get in the conversation with people in these aspects who are either non-believers or, agnostic, the ones that are more impassioned is sort of like, well, you're not going to convince me based on your arguments that I'm going to turn away from the faith. So who are you trying to convince? And why? So in other words, how does it hurt you if I do believe in this sky monster or whatever you want to call it? And that actually helps me to do good in this world. That's a way for me to actually do good for you and for others.
Because this guy was so kind.
Right.
They both are.
Right.
One of them is working for social justice like
Mhm.
crazy. They're 80 years old in his life.
Yes.
Well, anyway, I pray a lot for them.
Good.
I feel like if anybody can handle it, the Holy Spirit can handle it.
For sure, for sure.
But I hope he lets me know he doesn't
Yeah.
in some way.
Okay, I have a couple quick questions.
Okay,
Why is it, I know they tell you to stay away from, like the 8 ball and tarot
Mhm.
cards, and why is yoga grouped into that?
I
yeah,
don't
good.
get
Yeah,
anything.
yoga, yeah. So, I have to admit, I didn't know about this much, but I've read some videos, read some articles, read some videos, or watched some videos about this. So yoga itself stems from Hinduism,
Okay,
and the actual state, like apparently the actual, like the forms you take, like the moves you take,
right,
they're actually forms of worship of these pagan gods.
okay.
Now,
I know at the end, we
well,
all say namaste.
right, and that's actually, yeah, that's it's actually a physical prayer, which in reality you could say like, well, okay, is that good? I mean, so in other words, if I have the intention of doing that, do I have the intention of actually praising these?
No.
No. Okay, so if you're doing it for like more of a physical, like,
Yeah, actually,
I don't think there's
could be.
anything wrong
Okay.
with that.
Okay, I was
Now,
just-
I wouldn't necessarily go the whole if you can do it on your own,
Oh.
maybe that's a better thing to do. But yeah, the root of those that these are actually forms of worship
Okay,
towards these Hindu gods.
thank
And so, are there better ways? Maybe. I don't
Maybe, you know,
know.
when I'm thinking namaste, just, I always
I
think in
thought
my
it
head,
was just-
just
yeah,
peace,
you're right,
like,
yeah.
That's what I thought it meant.
But it is a prayer.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So I mean,
Now, and my other question, at Pentecost, Mary was there with the apostles. Did she ever perform any miracles? I mean,
well,
could have, correct?
I mean,
Well, I mean,
she gave
Jesus.
birth to Jesus.
Yeah,
I mean,
But I mean, like, after Jesus ascended and she was still there, I mean, you don't hear of anything. I mean, she was capable of it, correct?
oh, for sure.
But,
If anyone was, she
she
probably
didn't.
was it.
okay.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, we don't have anything recorded,
Right.
right? I mean, there's nothing biblically saying other than the incarnation, other than the virgin birth that she remained a
Mhm.
virgin for, during, and after. And of course, the Assumption. Now, that was be her miracle, that would be attributed to God.
Right.
So, but again, all miracles are attributed to God. So,
Yeah,
But
you know,
she would never call attention to herself.
no, because
So maybe as she walked through the marketplace,
Right.
she was just sprinkling
Right.
miracles
Yeah.
left and right. Nobody knew it.
I mean, I think that's a valid way of looking at it. That she was she capable, of course, but also would that have deterred or taken away attention from her son?
Yeah,
Right. So, yeah,
and she was a
Right.
girl too. You gotta think about that.
sure.
That wouldn't have been appropriate.
But no, I think we have to look. I mean, that kind of sounds the same argument when it comes to the Assumption. There's the big question: did Mary die? Right, because there's two schools of thought there. It's like, well,
yeah.
that's how that's celebrated, right? But there's two schools of thought saying, well, she wouldn't have done anything greater than her son, so therefore she would have followed her son in his death. But also, too, some argue, wouldn't it be a greater glorification of God if she didn't? And the Old Testament really kind of gives two options there. I mean, if you look at some figures that we attribute to be assumed in heaven, one of them was Enoch, which you don't really know much about, except he wrote. There was a book attributed to him, which also it has some very questionable things in it. Namely, it kind of pictured God as sort of growing in his wisdom and his godliness. And that would have been detrimental because, well, if that's the case, he wouldn't necessarily be God. It's almost sort of a Gnostic or a I think there was a sect of Judaism that kind of looked at it that way, that God kind of grew into his godliness. And actually, what was funny is actually that was depicted. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie. It was Russell Crowe played Moses, or no, was it Noah?
Or
Was it?
he played no, I don't know if it's the same.
Yeah.
movie.
Well, there was another one where Moses was depicted, and it showed like God when he was writing the Ten Commandments as like a child. It was, but I think it kind of took it from the Book of Enoch.
Oh, God, not, God the Father, not.
Yeah, God the Father. Yeah, right. And, well, maybe God. I don't know, but
Well,
they,
you
they
know,
were.
I mean, you do have to wonder, since we do, portray him
Mhm.
as incarnate, which he wasn't. But, you know, I can remember wondering in eternity, how long does it take to grow a white beard?
Right, right. Yeah, right.
Mormons know.
Yeah, you're right. So yeah, I mean, so we see that kind of depicted in some of the more modern contemporary film. But that's why also Enoch was never part of the original Pentateuch. That was never part of the Bible, because, well, this doesn't jive with what we understand God to be. If God has to grow, he's not God. Let's put it that way. So but we do know that Enoch was assumed into heaven. So that kind of gives credence to the fact that book was never really attributed to Enoch. Moses was thought to be assumed because we know where he was buried, yet we don't have a body. So that's interesting.
Well, how long
And then-
did they wait to assume it? I mean, to dig it up?
Oh, well, I think they went right away,
Oh,
because, like, I think after they went to the promised land, that was kind of the one thing they were going to take his body in with them.
oh,
And then, of course, Elijah, we're told, was assumed when the fiery chariot. So did he die? I mean, that's kind of.
but when they were assumed,
Mm.
were they assumed into Sheol? Is
No.
that what you called it?
No.
Oh.
Assumption means you're brought back in heaven,
Okay.
body and soul.
Okay, so they got to a heaven before Jesus.
Which is why at the Transfiguration,
Like
Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus on the Mount Tabor.
Yeah, well, that's
Right.
what I was wondering,
Yeah.
if they had their body or if they just borrowed it back
No,
for
they would have had their body.
the event.
Mhm. That's how you find the assumption that body and soul you're
So
taking.
So there were humans that went to heaven before Christ.
Yep.
And that would have been Joseph too, of course.
Well, Joseph wasn't before Christ. He was at the time of Christ.
No, I mean, he died. I thought he died when Christ was 18, before
Well,
the,
either way, he would have witnessed Jesus. Therefore, that would have
before
brought
the
him up.
resurrection.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the thing is, Jesus, witnessing Jesus would have allowed you to go into heaven, right?
Even the town folk?
Sure.
Who
if
believed
they
him?
believed in him, yeah. I mean, we would imagine St. John the Baptist was going right to heaven. We imagine that. The great Simeon, the priest in the temple,
Yeah, well,
right?
yeah,
He was told,
know,
"Hey, you're
yeah.
not going to die until
Well,
you see
then
the
it would
Christ."
have been Elizabeth also,
She's a saint,
There
sure.
would be crowd
So,
up
yeah,
there.
right. Yeah. Yeah, so I reckon him up
when
there,
he
yeah.
got home.
Yeah, we got racking them up. So yeah, so we don't think so. Yeah, I mean, but would Mary have died, or would she not? Did she even have a choice in it? That's the question.
Well,
right?
and if she had a choice, why would she wait? Unless she
Right.
had work to do. I kind of got the impression with her in the upper room at Pentecost, she was kind of an advisor. That
Well,
they
kind of-
looked
well,
on her as a mother figure.
I mean, if you read,
Even
like,
though she's
for
probably
instance,
younger than her.
if you read Luke's gospel, we would imagine a lot of his gospel and even Acts would have come from the Blessed Virgin, because she would have been an eyewitness and he would have talked to her about these things. Matthew even too, you would imagine. So yeah, she was
kind of the
instrumental.
den mother, huh?
Well, I think she was their mother.
Yeah,
Jesus gave her to
But, I
us on
mean,
the cross.
Yeah.
there must have been a reason she didn't just go.
Yeah,
But
well, I
don't you
imagine.
think? I mean, somebody said to me, "How could she wait till she was, I think, 48?" It's what I don't
Could
know
be.
where I heard that.
Well, let's put it this way: if she was 14 when Jesus was born, she would have been 47 when he was crucified.
Oh, well, then she did go right away.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
If
not
he was
necessarily,
48.
because she also was around. We also attributed that she was there for the Gospel of Luke. So Luke would have probably written his Gospel around the 60s, maybe even the 70s. So that puts even farther. Maybe she was close to like 80 before she actually died.
Well, unless,
And that would make sense because, again, at that time, people would have died probably in their 70s, 60s, early, like 50s even, right? So even like Jesus at the age of 33, they would have been the age of a grandparent in first century
Yeah.
Palestine. But because Mary was given special grace, we would assume she would also have had a relatively long life comparatively.
well, we think of special grace as a long life. If you had, watched your only son be crucified, you might have had enough.
Which also But see, but also that would, I think that would also give more credence to the fact that she wouldn't have died. Because if she had the preternatural gifts, one of those was eternal life. So,
Now, that would not be a gift, in
well,
my opinion.
it would be if you're in heaven, body and soul.
Yeah, yeah, but
So-
if she was still, you know, trudging around down here without any air conditioning, yeah, maybe not. But I think I agree that I agree. Who do I agree with? That Jesus appeared to Mary at his resurrection, and that's why she wasn't at the tomb. That he
Oh,
went
you
directly
mean,
to
that
his
could be,
mother.
that could be, sure.
And I bet he
yeah.
comes home every weekend.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
bet he kept his relationship
Yeah, I mean,
one
that's,
on one with
that's
her.
one thing that's
all
kind
her
of
life.
one of the mysteries of faith. Like, how does this special grace that Mary was given, that she was conceived out of original sin, she was in the state that Adam and Eve would have been in before the fall, and Adam and Eve were able to see God for who he was. Now, that doesn't mean they had the vision, but they would have been able to commune and interact with God in a very special way. So would Mary been having that same grace? Would she be able to do that too? I think you include that. Yeah, that she could.
And as a good Jewish mother,
Mhm.
she probably said, come home every
Sure,
weekend,
yeah, maybe.
even if you have to bring your laundry.
Yeah, maybe. Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, I can't imagine that they didn't see one another again until she was assumed.
Yeah, that's again.
They might
We
have
have silence when it comes to scripture, and when
communicated.
it comes to tradition, we don't really have much information there,
Yeah,
right? I mean, so again, we do know that she was probably an eyewitness that kind of helped with a lot of the gospel writing, especially with Matthew and Luke. She would have been an eyewitness and attribute to that writing. We do have an understanding that Luke probably did write his gospel probably after the fall of Jerusalem. And so, because also he was writing to Gentiles, it probably been a little bit after that time, so probably in the 70s, at which point Mary would have been probably in her 80s, which for the first century Palestinian woman would have been a very ripe old age, right? Now, there's even a question about, well, did Mary actually physically show signs of aging? That's a
Well-
good question too. I mean, she would have developed as a human being, but would she have like looked?
well,
I don't
she
know.
evolved from an infant to an adult.
That's what I'm saying. She would have
to
matured. Like,
puberty,
sure, of course.
obviously.
But I mean,
and-
that's also kind of funny too, because it's funny. Some of the kids, one of the fourth grade students asked, like, "Well, Adam and Eve. So when they were created, were they created like as infants? Or were they created as like men and women, or were like fully?" I was like, "Well, I think the assumption is they were created as fully developed humans." And Mary went through this process of maturity, right? That's different than Adam and Eve, because she was born. Not,
Yeah, we're gonna have
you
to do
know,
that Adam and Eve
it's
thing
it's
one
an
day.
interesting it's an interesting question to ask there, and I it's you could maybe assume
Because you think of all the visions, all the apparitions of
Mhm.
Mary, never old.
well also, but she's never the same.
This
So
is-
the interesting about Mary is that
Black
she
Madonna.
she appears to the people in the culture that she appears to them into.
Yeah.
So like you think about like
like
in
Italy.
in Portugal, in Lourdes, I mean so
In
in
Africa.
Africa, in Asia, she always appears to the people in the culture she's appearing to.
She's like Santa Claus.
Well,
She
she's not
does too.
old. She's not
And you're
old.
right, she isn't. But then again, too, as someone who is in heaven, do you choose? I mean, I don't
I
know.
heard they're all 33.
What's that?
I heard they're all 33. And
Oh.
my mother used to tell us, you kids make me feel like I'm older than Methuselah.
You're right.
Well, one day we're watching Phil Donahue or something together, and this person who had a near-death experience said, everybody in heaven is 33. And she and I looked at one another with the same thought and burst out laughing. She was older than,
Well,
but
well that comes from Aquinas. So.
yeah, well, I mean, what my
Yeah.
dad think when he got there and his newborn was 33 years
Yeah,
old.
right. Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
right.
Okay, I have a question about Mary now.
Okay.
You're saying, we're saying, I have to include myself in all this. We're saying that she appears as if she's in that culture. So
Yeah.
does that mean in her appearance in Asia, she appeared as
An Asian woman,
Mhm.
yeah.
And in Mexico, she appeared with dark.
Well, in
skin?
Mexico, she appeared as what they call not, what is it? I
Clothes,
can't-
Atilma.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
but she was actually, so what's funny, she didn't appear as a native nor as a European. She actually appeared as a combination of the two.
Okay.
So mestiza. So she appeared as like, so yeah,
Here she is.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, It's hard to tell. I mean, it's.
And like in
pretty
lore, she appeared as a French woman, very alabaster skin, very white. And so she appears to the culture that she's in.
So this latest one where Father Don Calloway, Medjugorje,
Medjugorje.
Yeah.
is she appearing as Filipina? Or is that where this is?
No.
No, Medjugorje's
Medjugorje.
is in like Bosnia, like Eastern Europe.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, I
So
was
Yeah.
thinking
she
it
would
was-
appear as more like she was
Right.
in.
Well,
But-
when she walked there, she was more like probably olive skin, more like
Yeah.
Middle Eastern.
Yeah,
In Eastern Europe, probably more whiter, I would imagine.
well, what was my question first? I already forgot it.
But yeah, that's usually I mean, so that usually when we have a Marian apparition, and the other thing I think we talk about this too. The thing about Marian apparitions is what's funny is the church never definitively teaches that it actually happens.
They give you the option to believe it.
They give the option to believe it. They say you can have a devotion to this particular apparition, but whether it actually happened or not, the church never definitively says it does or doesn't.
Not even
When
with the dancing was that.
70,000 people witnessed it. Well,
Fatima. So what the church says about Fatima is you can have a devotion on Our Lady of Fatima. That you can still call yourself Catholic and do that. But whether it actually happened or not, we are not going to definitively say yes or no.
Is
I
that
like
because
that.
None of the governing body, the Pope and all the cardinals didn't.
There's no way of verifying, right? There's no way of actually. I mean, although I have witnesses, I don't know, I wasn't there. But even if, let's say, even the Pope were, they keep open. They try to keep it open mind, right? Because let's say down the road there's some evidence comes up, it's like, hey, you know what, this actually was a mistake. This we found this evidence, and this actually scientifically proves that didn't happen. Oh, okay.
Well, what about the saints then? Because first,
Saints are the same way. So what church teaches about saints is you have to believe there's a community of saints. In other words, you have to believe there are people in heaven.
yeah,
But you don't have to necessarily believe there are particular saints in heaven. So like, so what I mean by that is, if the church would say, I think we've done this analysis and we say that Paul VI, for instance, he's a canonized saint. We believe he's in heaven
because of the miracle.
because of the miracles, whatever. But you don't have to personally believe that.
Believe the miracles or believe that he,
Believe that actually is a saint.
okay.
Or really the miracles.
Yeah, I was
Well,
gonna say, they will sanction the miracles, but they won't sanction.
Well, that's the thing. That's not that they sanction.
Okay.
They can say that there's a legitimate cause here to say, because of what this person was doing, this event that happened, that this person is a saint in heaven. It's reasonable to think that.
well, that at Lourdes, which was very interesting. Did you see that 60 Minutes or that show on Lourdes not too long ago? And there was one man who had come 17 times, and he was about as crippled as you'd be.
Hmm.
If you don't mind the word, it's a real word, in my opinion. Rankin Jordan used to be Rankin Jordan Home for Crippled Children. Anyway, he's in a wheelchair, and they interviewed him, and they said, you've come 17 times and you're still physically terribly disabled, but you say you think you've experienced a miracle. You said, yeah, I'm not the same man. I'm not the
Sure.
angry man.
Sure.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So his miracle was
Conversion of heart.
emotional.
Yeah, right.
Of the
Yeah.
soul,
Yeah.
And they say that
it's
people,
physical.
they say that anyone who goes to Lord's, you walk away with a miracle in some way, whether it be a physical or a spiritual one.
Yeah.
But even then, I mean, that's what I'm saying, that when we talk about like this understanding of the communion of saints, I don't have to believe that particular saints that the church canonized actually is Catholic. I have to believe there is a communion of saints, but I don't have to determine, because, and the reason why is because it's not obligatory to actually offer veneration to a particular saint. That's devotional in nature, right?
Okay.
So I can have a devotion to let's say Paul VI. Okay, great. Doesn't mean everyone has to.
Yeah, Therese of Lisieux is a good one.
So, but then you can also say, you say the communion of saints, it could even be my parents. If
Of
they're
course.
gonna-
Oh, I definitely think
Right.
that.
That's the purpose of All Saints Day.
Okay,
We have the Solemnity of All Saints Day. That's not for the canonized saints. That's for the saints we don't know if they're in heaven or not, right?
Yeah.
But they maybe objectively are, but we don't know.
Well, but what about John Paul II? Is it doctrine or dogma of the church, the divine mercy?
oh, that came from Saint Faustina.
So that was implemented liturgically in the second Sunday of Easter. But even then, right? So that's not obligatory. So if you want to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet on Divine Mercy Sunday, you can. You're not obliged to.
Oh, believe me, I do.
But what I'm saying is, but the difference is, you're not obligated to do that. That's devotional.
But do we believe it is real as far as the indulgence? But, and my point to that is John Paul II died on Divine Mercy.
Mhm.
Well, hours before.
Right.
Assuming in his bed he had confessed and was up to date on his confession
Sure. Right.
all along. I thought that's why he was canonized right away, because he died on Divine Mercy Sunday, which would have taken away all sin.
The canonization
that-
process. So there's an ordinary process.
Because usually it's 100 years.
But
seems
well,
like.
what it's not even a time frame thing. It's there's a normal. So the way the process of canonization works is the ordinary form. Okay, let's say my grandmother died. She was a saintly woman. I love my grandma. I am going to write a letter to the Archbishop. I'm going to say, Excellency, I think my grandmother's saint, and here's why. Boom, boom, boom. Okay.
I did.
The Archbishop can take that and say, yeah, this seems pretty reasonable. Let's send a group over there to investigate your grandmother and determine if these are valid, if she actually lived a life of virtue, of heroic virtue. And if she did, we can maybe go through that process. So he'll send a delegation to go research my grandmother, where she was from, maybe talk to people that knew her, talk to her family, talk to her friends, and say, hey, how was she as a person? How was her faith life? What'd she do? Blah, blah. That gets taken back. So in that delegation, you have some that are like, okay, let's look at the good. And you have a devil's advocate saying, oh, well, she liked to smoke a little bit. No,
Oh,
right yet.
Okay, Graham, sorry.
Granted. So no, otherwise, that's all put together. The Archbishop reviews that and say, you know what? Your grandmother seems like a pretty decent lady. I think you're right. We are then going to make her a servant of God. We're going to send this to Rome. Rome is going to come and take a look at her, do the same investigation, if not more, and determine these things are valid. Okay. They come in. This again, same process. Okay, well, let's look at this, okay. Yeah, grandma seems pretty good. All right, I think we can make her a venerable. Wonderful. All right, at that point, we're saying, yep, there's a pretty good chance she's in heaven. We're good with that. At that point, there can start being what they call a cult towards grandma, meaning you can have prayers and devotions and ask for intercession. And based on that, Rome still would look at these things, say, okay, hey, oh, you know what? I was actually for the intercession of grandma, and my friend of mine who had cancer, he was doing the same thing, and now the cancer is completely gone, and we don't know how it happened. It can't be explained. Rome will come, they'll investigate the same way, what was going on, what were we doing, we'll talk to the doctors. Well, this seems like a legitimate miracle, so we're going to now say that grandma's been elevated to be blessed. And then okay, now we're going to maybe start looking at putting grandma on a calendar. Maybe we have a particular liturgy of the hours dedicated to her or whatever, and we're going to develop this cult more. And so through that, again, we're asking the intercession of grandma, and there's another miracle comes about. They research that, and hey, you know what? This legitimate. We're going to give her a day on the calendar where we actually celebrate her in the mass as a canonized saint of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and it's
And then-
usually the date that they die, correct?
It could be another significant date that really kind of like, like first, I think for John Paul II was the day he was actually made the Pope,
Okay.
right? It could be their birth. I mean, there's other days you can choose, but yeah, typically it's the day they die.
And then grandma's off the hook and she can just enjoy herself and have.
Well, but again, though, I don't have to necessarily believe grandma is a saint. I mean, I
Well,
just,
also,
okay.
he
you know.
thought that if you attributed a miracle to someone, you couldn't have prayed to anybody else. Oh, gosh, if my
That's
car doesn't
key.
start, I pray to everybody I've
That's
ever heard
usually-
of.
Right. But I mean, again, I mean, it could be, right, there has to be a legitimate, it has to be, this was the person I was answering session for, that was it, this would
Yeah.
happen, yes. Now, all that though can go through an extraordinary form, meaning the Pope can just say, yep, that person's a saint, good, done.
If she only knew my grand.
No verification.
That is what the Pope can do.
Well, and he canonized Mother Teresa right away.
That's kind of how, well, there are certain miracles I think it attributed to her anyway,
Yeah,
but yeah, he could have, I mean.
it usually takes forever.
The Pope can do that though. He can just say, yeah, you know what, your grandma's a great woman. I knew her really
Saint
well. Done,
Faustina.
great. That's it.
Yeah,
Well, and Carlos will do this.
Right.
I mean,
Right,
wanna
he's very
give
young.
that's the little boy,
He
right?
died,
Yeah.
well, he was 15, he
Teenager.
died in 2006.
Right.
And he's a blessed at this point,
Right. Yeah,
you know,
Wow.
and but I mean, even then, I mean, there's, yeah, I don't know if, I think there has been some miracles attributed to him though, too. So again, it's not a cut and dry process all the time.
right.
There's the ordinary form, the extraordinary form of doing this. And the Pope really oversees all of that. If you want to say, one's enough. Or you know
And
what,
you know-
good.
Okay, so Pope, who was it, Benedict or JP2 that did Mother Teresa?
That probably would have been
John.
Benedict.
Was it Benedict?
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's see. She was
can't
canonized in
remember when she did
2014, right?
Oh, and that would have been
Might have
Francis.
Francis. I think it was
He came
Francis.
in
Yeah.
first.
Benedict probably was instrumental in that,
Yeah.
but yeah, that probably was Francis.
Yeah,
If you don't mind, I'm gonna scoot too. We
Okay.
just got home from Florida.
Oh,
today,
great.
and,
Well, thanks for coming.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
thank
Yeah,
you.
very
I'm
good.
going to get over here, so.
Okay, great.
Everybody, say
Good.
hi.
All right. Well, tell Steve hi.
I will, I will. So yes, we were at my nephew's first communion.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, good,
Yeah, yeah. So, it was very nice.
good.
They
Great.
split it up. It was kind of, they had one at 9 in the morning and then one at 11:30. They split the class up in
Do
two.
they have a grade school in the PSR program, maybe?
No, they split them up by their names,
Oh.
like A through H was at one time and then
wow.
Well, if they have a lot of kids, maybe that's the way, yeah, I don't
people
know.
were like 30.
33, oh, that's,
That's
I
not,
don't.
yeah, the
I don't-
church was only half
Some
full,
pastors
but-
do things, I know some places do it, like they'll have the grades, like the day school kids and the PSR kids.
Yeah.
And I think that the argument against that caused a lot of division,
Oh,
which,
yeah.
whatever, I don't know.
But anyway, it
Okay.
was wonderful and it was
Alright.
nice and got away for a few days
Good.
and got to the beach. So.
I'm glad you're back.
Me too.
All right.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. We'll see you later.
all. Take
Drive
care.
safely.
Oh,
All right.
I'm
Okay,
sorry
walk
to be
safely.
late. I don't know what all this parking's about, where everybody was coming here.
Oh, yeah, there's a recital going on for the school. Yeah, right.
Well, I was tearing apart what's left of my house that I have to give up. And I found a whole box of pictures.
Ooh.
And this is my first communion.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
Let's see.
keeper.
In 59, I think it was. What?
You're adorable.
I am.
Who's the dude?
That's Frankie Price. He lived across the court. He was in my class. And they always did first communions on Mother's Day.
Oh,
He slipped out of the house with his mother's dozen red roses and brought them to me.
oh, nice. Very good.
And my mom immediately called her. And she said, well, Christine should keep 6 of them. So that's me and Frankie Price.
I love the petticoat. I remember those petticoats.
Oh, the dress, I had to, do you wanna see it? Cause that was adorable.
Now, was that before or after confirmation?
Before confirmation was, I thought of it at the same time, but I guess it was
Probably about a
maybe
year
the
apart.
next year. But my dress, I had to, oh, my hands.
I mean, the skirts were like
Yeah,
this.
so I
yeah.
could see over it. But, and there might be my, aunt and uncle Jane and Dick, just like the readers, Jane and Dick.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
They, but that's little Frankie Price,
Nice.
the little thief.
Okay, I should just bring my notepads, I guess.
I read,
Um, So I finally watched the Easter Vigil video
Oh, okay.
a month.
oh,
late.
yeah, I never thought about watching it.
I have a question,
Uh-huh,
and this is just because it's how I hear things.
yeah.
But as you're having everyone, okay, so you did Ashley and Gina's baptism,
Right.
and somehow in that formation, the singer, the
Yeah,
chanter,
Cantor, yeah.
is, I'm thinking she's listing everyone in our class.
Litany of Saints,
Okay.
yes.
I'm not there.
In the litany, Martha?
No. This is when she's listing everyone's name, Brandon and Alex.
Oh,
Well, so no, what she's singing is the Litany of Saints. So it's not Brandon, it's Saint Brandon. Saint
Saint Alex.
Alexander. Pray for us. I think Saint Catherine was in there.
But I'm not Catholic.
Yeah, but there is no Saint Kate.
Right.
There's Saint Catherine.
Okay, but I'll go listen to it
Okay,
again, but
yeah.
I remember her saying Saint Gina, Saint Lillian, Saint
Yeah.
Jacob.
Right.
Are you saying that they're also all saints?
Yeah, there's a Saint Jacob, there's Saint Lily. Yeah, so what happens is whenever you're ready for the Easter Vigil, Mary Beth Woodbury, she gets the names of you guys and says, okay, and if I have the confirmation names, I give them to her too at that time. And usually I don't by then, usually because some people have last minute. So what I do is I verify their baptismal names as saints, if they are saints. And then we use that in the liturgy, in the what we call the Litany of Saints for the baptisms, right? So there's a Saint Catherine. There's not a saint. So usually when it comes to like these words, like let's say there's one I ran into. There's a baptism I had recently where the name was Jack, not John, Jack.
yeah. They're
Okay,
naming him Jackson now.
right. So there isn't a Saint Jack, but Jack comes from John, and there is a Saint John. So we use the saint name
Mhm.
rather than the name that's given on the baptismal record,
Okay.
right? So that's kind of how that works. So
Okay.
so in other words, let's say if there's a now let's say for instance we're talking about this canonization process. Let's say Kate, you go to your eternal rest, and we put a cause for you, and the Vatican says, oh, you know what, Kate Morales, saint of the Catholic Church, wonderful. Then we use Saint Kate all we want. So if there's another person named Kate,
So it's just
Thank
that I
you.
heard it in an odd fashion.
you heard the actual saint that where your name comes from, not necessarily your name.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
okay.
So we always use the saint that we have rather than the name of the person that's given.
Okay.
And then, I mean, it happens a lot. Like for instance, we have like some of these names are getting kind of like
Oh,
very
God. What do you
like-
do with Meredith,
well. There was like a Knox,
Madison?
right?
Yeah.
Actually, they're actually so
Tucker.
again. You always want to. Usually, what
Yeah.
happens in those situations, I look at the etymology, like where it comes from,
Yeah,
and then I see if there's like a saint that kind of like relates to it in some way,
yeah.
and that's the name I'd use for litany.
Okay.
That's
'Cause
how that
mine
goes.
would be Christina,
Right,
I believe, but
Right.
my name was always Christine.
right, right. Or we just use Saint Christopher.
Well, that's what I would like.
Right. So again, it always kind of depends on, is there a saint with that name If there's not, is there a correlation?
Yeah.
Or or is the saint that we're using, the saint that's given, is there an etymology associated with another saint?
Okay.
I always loved Christopher because my godparents named their youngest son Christopher,
Yeah.
so I was pretended he was named after me.
There
And
you go.
Saint Christina, though, I would say she was heroic. She
Well,
gave
yeah.
away her father's money, and he put her in a furnace for 10 days,
Oh, yeah.
and it didn't bother her a bit.
So that's what's kind of makes it used to be in the old church that you couldn't even put a non-saint name on the baptismal record.
Oh yeah,
So like before like 1970, if you were getting baptized, you may have your birth
You had to have a
certificate, but
saint
you would have to have a saint name on your baptismal
Yeah.
record. Right?
Yeah. but we still called people Kate. I
Right.
mean, we knew a Kate,
Right.
but it must have been Catherine.
Yeah. I mean, so it all
Okay.
depends.
It-
on- yeah,
it's just, because when I listened to it last night and I listened to it again this morning, I was like, I'm not there. I mean, I'm there, but I'm.
Right,
not
yeah,
there. Okay,
yeah.
so then the second part of that, and this. It's one of those hovering entities in my
Mhm.
life. And we probably talked about this earlier, but the words said in any sacrament,
Mhm.
is that where God's power resides?
That's where the grace is being given.
Okay,
Right, so we're talking about, sacraments always have four elements. It's the matter, the form, the minister, recipient. So in the baptism on that night, when I said, now you have to use the name. When I just say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and pour the water over their head, that grace is being given at that moment to that person.
okay,
When I laid my hands on you and said, be sealed with the gifts of the Holy Spirit, you're receiving the sacrament of confirmation at that moment,
okay,
right?
all right.
Right. And you're
Alright.
acknowledging that by saying amen,
Amen.
right?
Okay, so, and I know we talked about this, but again, it's.
Yeah. It was, I mean, it's a lot. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But. I hate not having words. really do. If it is said incorrect, or if it is,
Not done right. Let's say I was using, instead of like prism oil, I was like, let's say oil of catechumen or
okay,
oil of the sick, maybe.
is that void? That's.
It is an invalid sacrament.
It is an invalid.
Yes, in which case I would have to redo the sacrament for you. Or I would have to actually do it for real,
Okay,
right? And so if there, that's been caused a lot of consternation. So
Well, that happened big time.
yeah,
California.
Phoenix recently.
And we
There's a
talked-
big issue. Yeah, right. So, like for instance, if you were going through that video, let's say at Easter Vigil, and someone said, "Oh, Father, you said instead of saying be sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit, you said be sealed with the Holy Spirit." Oof. Okay. Why don't you come back over to the church and let's make sure we do it right. Right.
and that's across the board, Eucharist, anything.
If I don't say anything, but
Reconciliation.
if I say, let's say, yeah, so when it comes to the Eucharist, for instance, if I don't say this is my body, or I say that's my body, that's not the Eucharist. Right? In which case that would not be a valid mass. Right? The words are important.
Okay,
And so that's why it's good you have to get them right.
Well, that whole crowd of people who are all grown up and spread throughout the world. The priest was saying, we baptize you.
Right.
It's like we of Saint Gabriel
Mhm,
baptize you. And they're trying to find them. They're trying to find all those people. Well, I guess I'm just pretty sloppy about my religion because, I've heard people say we have to conform, but Jesus does not.
Sure.
And so I'm thinking those people going through their whole lives, some of them probably dead.
Yeah.
Thinking that they were baptized, I would think that's good enough for Jesus because it wasn't their
Well,
doing.
and to that point, they can receive the sacraments by desire.
Well, except they think they already had it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah,
would be
What
the,
I'm saying is they're covered.
especially
because-
if they were
right,
confirmed,
Yeah.
because that's pretty much
Well, no, here's the
No,
problem with that, though.
not?
If they weren't validly baptized, they haven't received sacrament confirmation valid either. Because a valid recipient of the sacrament confirmation is a baptized person.
Yeah, but again, if this infant and then 8-year-old
Right.
was completely
Yeah,
unaware,
and so to that
then
point,
I
what
think
I'm-
Jesus thinks,
and I agree with you,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
again, we understand the sacraments are given by desire too.
yeah,
And so even if someone had the right intention saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to this, and even if the minister screwed up, we would understand
Yeah.
that, because if they're dead, especially, God would still provide that grace for them.
yeah, I mean.
But if they're not, we want to make sure they are. Right?
Oh,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
if you can
yeah.
fix it,
Right.
but, you know, you can't have people who've been good Catholics all their life find out on their death, oh, none of that mattered, none of that worked,
No, but also too,
because they're receiving communion.
right, but also too, I would make sure they receive that sacrament before they die and do everything I can to
But-
do that.
Yeah, except none of them knew until
Yeah,
somebody
well,
goes, I don't.
yeah, that's,
yeah.
but I think what it goes show is the theological significance of those words.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And so
yeah.
again, we have to do everything we can to make sure that
Yeah.
people receive it correctly.
And then everybody thought, well, can't the Pope just say,
Well, yeah, no.
those,
That's because I mean, again, that was one of the theological issues there, was that it's not I'm not representing the church in baptizing somebody. I'm actually representing Jesus himself,
yeah,
which is why I use the word I, right? And it's like Nebris, this is my body, because I'm saying the person of Jesus Christ when I'm saying that. Not
Yeah.
Father Mark, it's Jesus saying that.
yeah,
And that's the same with all the sacraments. That when those words are being said, it's Jesus saying those words, not the person.
but that's just during the consecration. And for the rest of the liturgy,
Yeah.
the rest of the mass.
Right.
Because I said something about when you give communion,
Mhm.
how is it that the liturgical, communion ministers can do it,
Right,
but you're not acting.
right. You're not
Jesus
present, right,
in
exactly. Right,
offering the
right,
communion.
right.
Okay, I had a couple questions last week, we were talking about devotions. Well, I got a couple questions about that. You talked about liturgical devotion, and you said if during.
Well, I think it was big. I think it was big distinction between liturgy and devotion. So there's a difference between liturgy
Okay.
and devotion.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
okay, well, in the liturgy, you said if the host is displayed
Okay,
Are-
talk about adoration.
adoration.
Yeah, sure. That is in liturgy.
And then there are two people.
There should be two people there at all
And
times.
one lead. What does one of us who has no authority do? You said the host should be put in.
Should be repose. Yeah, right.
Well, when it was put in repose on Holy Thursday, it was paraded around and put in a little tiny.
Right. And Holy
tabernacle.
Thursday is a different liturgy than the.
But, I mean, there's no place you could put that big monstrance.
No, but you can take, so,
But what would a person who doesn't have
you're
that
good. Okay, good.
authority
So
do?
so
If I'm the only one there.
extraordinary ministers are trained. And if they actually extraordinary minister, anyone can do it. Open up the monstrance, take the luna out, the little glass piece, put it back in the custodian, which is that metal box, and then put that in the tabernacle.
Okay, where's the metal box? At the bottom of the,
So when you if you ever come to exposition, what happens is in the tabernacle, it's like a round metal box with like a opening door that kind of rolls open.
oh, okay,
And we put that out on the altar when we expose Jesus and keep it out there during the exposition. Right. So let's say someone, instead of two doors, one person leaves. The other door can go up to the monstrance, take Jesus out of the monstrance, either or you just take the luna itself, the metal, the glass part, and put it back in the tabernacle too. That's fine as well. Either way works. As long as Jesus put back in the tabernacle, if there's not two doors, I think.
so I'll take my cane with me if I ever.
But I would also say too, if even there's only one door, that would be okay too, to keep Jesus out in the monstrance, right?
So you just step it up.
Right. So, but if, let's say if you were to
Horrible
leave,
part.
let's say Christine, you were the last one in there. And there was no one else
Oh,
there,
no one.
and you were getting ready to leave. You could go put Jesus back in the tabernacle.
Okay, and then would I contact the rectory
You
in
could,
case somebody is coming
yeah.
50
Well,
minutes later?
Usually if someone were to come in later, they could also expose Jesus again,
If they know,
if they know.
because not, I have 20/20 vision now and I don't see a host.
Well, to be fair, so that, the way you indicated whether the host is in or not, is if the monstrous is turned to the side. So
Okay,
you'll notice
so-
when we first start exposition on the first two Tuesdays, the monstrous isn't facing the people, it's actually facing the side.
Okay,
And then when we come up to put the Luna in, we go in and close it, and we put it toward
okay, so the Luna is.
that little glass piece that slides in. Yeah.
Is it in that box or is it in the cabinet?
Usually we keep it in that little box,
Okay,
right?
all right, so, if I would, and maybe if it's closing time, well,
Yeah.
no, you have Benedict,
Right.
right? But if I would, and say it's a stormy day, so
Yeah.
it's not likely somebody's coming,
Sure.
I would put it in the tabernacle and then turn
To the
the
side.
monstrance.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Just
I'll
indicate that
just
Jesus.
hang out. till somebody
Right,
shows
right.
up.
And you can do that too. You can do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I
but
think I would
but
because,
some people, usually people sign up for just hours at a time.
yeah,
And maybe there could be a situation where, let's say, both the doors are supposed to be there next hour, but maybe they got caught in traffic or a medical emergency. You want to be charitable. And so you shouldn't leave Jesus alone, exposed.
yeah,
There should be at least one door there at all time. And if, let's say, you had to leave because maybe you have a whatever, that person should repose Jesus in the tabernacle.
okay, I have another question, do you have more
I
for any
have-
questions?
I have one.
Okay.
And it's email eye.
All right.
And I'm gonna start this out being kind of silly.
Mhm.
I'm gonna die.
Yeah, sure. We all are.
I'm 20. So you get it. And I think I've asked in a very disconnected way several times. What do I need to do now? In order to have a good death?
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
And by good death, I mean, I
Saint Joseph.
The intercession of Saint Joseph is good. Yeah.
Good death,
As to the intercession of Saint Joseph, he's the patron of a happy death.
okay.
But as far as like sacramentally, I think it's good just to receive the sacraments regularly. Right? So do
Because
that.
apart from in order to doesn't apply in
Right.
marriage, which I don't.
Right, right.
I've completed what I can complete
Yeah.
on this point.
You received the sacraments of initiation, you received the sacraments of healing. You receive the sacraments of healing over and over again.
Right.
And so I think doing that regularly is good, right? As well as the Eucharist, right? So now, at the point when you're ready to go, it'd be good to have someone, if not you, contact one of us to provide the apostolic pardon for you. Right,
Okay.
right,
I'll contact them.
Yeah.
You just let me know.
Right.
I'm all over that apostolic part.
yeah. So that's part of the Viaticum.
I'm gonna figure out a way to get one.
It includes confession, Eucharist, and anointing. And at the end, we will provide the apostolic pardon. Right. Now we
were anywhere. Like I said, mom's anniversary. I heard that.
Yeah.
is next.
Oh.
And my stepfather Martin, his anniversary is in July.
Uh-huh.
Dad's is passed.
Yeah.
I treat dad differently.
Okay.
But because of everything else that is presenting itself now,
Uh-huh.
and Thursday is part of this. Physically, I know things are gonna happen. that
Yeah.
I have no.
Right.
control. Spiritually, I wanna make sure that I'm square.
Yeah, sure, of course, right, yeah.
And I don't think that
Well, again, we have to, in those situations, we have to basically put them in the mercy of God
Right,
and trust them that God knows better than we how that's working, right?
right.
And so, even if there was just a, a crack, even if there was just a little bit of contrition and faith, God can work there,
Okay.
right? But yeah, that doesn't mean we can't get ourselves ready for that moment. And I think we do that by regular reception of the sacraments, right? And also try to arrange for a priest to be there when we go, so we can actually do that.
Well, and you said you don't wait till the last breath.
Correct.
You know, when you're sick,
Yeah.
you
The,
know,
the most frustrating thing for me as a priest is when you get a call from somebody, a child, a relative, or somebody that's on their deathbed, and like, Father, we need last rites now. Okay, well, who is this person? Where are you guys? I mean, obviously we go regardless, but it's kind of frustrating the way that like people tend to think I'm not going to call the priest until it is the time for death,
yeah,
instead of why don't you call me when you're going to the hospital? Why
yeah.
don't you call me when you're getting ready for the surgery? Why don't you call me when you've been diagnosed?
And I'll never
Because
get over that I did for my mom. Even when we had, 11 o'clock, we'll
Yeah.
all be here.
Yeah.
I was just so overwhelmed with the very idea that this 89-year-old with heart trouble and Alzheimer's was actually gonna die.
and the reason why that's significant, if you want me to
It's very
interject real quick, yeah,
significant to
is
me.
because as we're right now we're going through this process in the archdiocese because we don't have numbers. And so one of the struggles I think is that as a priest, there in the future there may not be a guarantee that a priest could actually be there. And so that's why it's important to actually maintain this beforehand. So that if the fact that this priest can't be there, you're still in a good state.
And a deacon cannot.
A
do
deacon
that.
a deacon cannot administer the sacrament of anointing or confession, nor can they provide the apostolic part. Right.
Okay, you call me
Yeah.
first. And
Well, if
I'll
I
have
go
him on
first-
speed dial.
If I go first,
Well, you're the ones planning it already.
no, I'm not planning. I'm trying to get
Well,
my feet
Yeah.
going on the right.
But no, but
Well,
you
why?
can't. But here's the thing: you can't go wrong regardless if you're receiving the sacrament regularly.
Okay.
Right.
Well, with your mother though, isn't it true that, there's no time up here and when we're plodding along day by day
Right.
down here
Right.
and in purgatory. But isn't it true? I've heard more than one lecture on the fact that any prayer that you say now for your mother is available to her at death.
Is efficacious toward? Yeah, of course. Yes.
So God
Yeah.
knows that 20 years later, you're gonna pray for her. Or 200 years later, somebody's gonna pray for
As a matter of
George
fact, it was
Washington.
to that end,
Really?
Christine. So Padre Pio used to say. So there was a woman that came to Padre Pio and visited him in the monastery and was asking, the issue was her son committed suicide. And she asked, like, Father, what can I do? I mean, obviously, is my son in hell? And Father Pio said, well, I don't know, but pray for him. And her response was like, well, wait a minute, why would that be effective now? Because he's already gone. And he's basically said what you said, Christine. It's like your prayers are still effective for him even now, because God is outside of time and space, right? So the prayers we do now can retroactively affect our loved ones, even at the point of their death, even though it
Yeah.
happened in the past,
Yeah,
right?
and I think I told you what really got me back in the church was the agony over my cousin's
Mhm.
death, who had a terribly abused childhood and ended up being a child molester. So he was in prison. I didn't go and see him. I thought about it. And then he died. Like a weekend after I decided to call the prison and get permission.
Oh.
And I just was and I still feel so distraught.
Yeah.
I'm no Sister Brigitte, and I don't know that I would have tried to bring him, but now I don't know. He might have made himself a saint.
Yeah.
Years he was
Yeah.
in prison.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have to understand our prayers are efficacious. They're effective.
Yeah,
And even if someone's already passed, they're still effective for them too.
yeah,
so
and
yeah.
so, but. You know, I mean, I don't know if there's a point where it's just hell. I mean, it doesn't matter what somebody prays for you
Sure.
20
Well,
years
but
later.
again, our
But I
prayers.
can't imagine he suffered so much.
I think the
even
other thing
though
too
it's
is our prayers aren't wasted either. So
Yeah.
even if someone is in hell, our prayers will still be efficacious for somebody, right? And
Yeah,
that'd be tribute to us as merit too, right?
well, and
Yeah.
with Clement, I have a picture of him when he was about 5 and he had a little colic. And I think this child deserved as much respect,
Sure.
which he didn't get from his father, and love as any other child.
Sure.
And I mean, he was just abused like crazy. And most abusers
Right.
have been
Yeah,
abused,
right,
but not all people who've been abused.
Right.
But I think it's not possible that I am more compassionate than Jesus.
Oh no.
And
no,
I
no,
feel
no.
nothing but compassion for him.
Yeah.
And you know, for a long time I was angry because having those compulsions, I thought, well, Glenda, you should have just taken yourself out, you know, suicide or whatever you had to do to save other children. And you know, I pray for those victims
Of
too,
course.
because
Yeah, good.
what I mean, but anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
no,
my
yeah,
cousin
we always,
Gary just died.
we always want to trust in God's mercy, that his mercy is
Yeah.
enduring. That it's
Yeah.
open to anybody who wants who chooses
Yeah.
to receive it, right? So of course.
And he knew that little 5-year-old whose dad made him meal on rice when he was bad. I mean, that's what they did in the concentration camps too. Anyway,
yeah,
I just, that made me think, I don't have anything better to do than pray for Glenda.
There you go.
And, so,
Yeah,
It's good for me, too.
we can always do that. So I think it's always good to kind of keep that open and even those that actually are, I mean, that's why even praying for people that we don't agree with and that maybe were our enemies is good.
yeah.
Because that can actually, that right, that, I mean, that could be very effective.
Oh, you're
be more
supposed to.
effective.
Mary, you know, in her, when we finish the rosary, Helen has, you know, her little extras, and all the information that goes with them. And then I told you one of the prayers is for the God to tell the people in purgatory that they can pray for us.
Sure.
And
Right. Yeah.
one day, were you there when she said, and that could relieve some of the boredom?
No, I don't.
Oh, well, she's precious.
Yeah.
I just love her. But anyway, when we turn to the painting of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and Maria Consuelo says a prayer that is mostly in Spanish, but she throws in daughter-in-law, son-in-law. But she says amigos, enemies, she includes enemies,
Yeah.
neighbors.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I heard, that if you pray enough for somebody, you'll like them.
Yeah, that's true.
And sometimes you just don't want to. I don't want to
Well,
like.
I think that's the thing too. We have to I think it kind of goes to the conversation we had earlier that we have to recognize that sometimes the people that we don't like, they're probably the first ones going to be entering the heaven, and so we're going to have to be with them for eternity, right? So it's important to kind of grow into that. And some people
Yeah.
actually claim that's what purgatory kind of like too.
But
is
if
that
there's
it's
a
kinda-
billion people up there, I hope Janet is
yeah.
next to
Well,
me.
what I'm saying is that kind of what purgatory is about too, is kind of conditioning ourselves to be detached even of that relationship.
Oh, you have
right?
to, not
Yeah.
only
Yeah, see what
your
I'm saying? So-
jewelry,
So
you
all
have
my
to let
angst
go.
about
Yeah.
The cat fights and
It's part of that. I think it's part of purgatory is that we're getting rid of those effects of that attachment we've had in this life, so we can actually be one with God and these people in heaven. Right.
Well, I thought of something funny when you said, you know, you're working with this person that, you know, the easiest way to get rid of that problem is
Yeah.
kill.
Sure.
Well, it reminded me, the priest, and I can't think of his name, it begins with a C. He was converted, then he became a priest. And his favorite saint was one who was exiled and then cut back and exiled and then got back. Well, apparently he was accused of misbehavior.
Okay.
and he left the priesthood. And I thought, well, would that be
Oh.
like exiled and go back? No, because in the Catholic Church, you can't defend yourself. Or anyway, I heard him. He calls himself the Black Sheep, and
Okay,
he still ministers. I don't think as priest. I don't know. He calls himself now the Black Sheep or the Black Shepherd. I don't know. But
okay,
anyway, this is what I wanted to tell you. He said, you know, in the olden days, the saints and the monks wore a hair shirt.
Mm.
He said, but when you live in a monastery, you're probably sitting next to your hair shirt at
Sure.
the dinner table.
oh, sure, yeah. I've often said this, I was actually, we were talking about this, I can't remember who, recently, but, we were talking about like, hearing confession and stuff, and I said, sometimes the hardest confessions, we were talking about the second greatest agreement for first communion, we heard, and how kind of draining sometimes it is to hear children's confessions, because it's the same stuff over and over again, and blah, blah. I
Mine
said,
were.
I said, the only one that made me worse than that is hearing confessions of professed religious. Because I equate it to being stabbed to death with a feather. Because usually the confession you hear out of these people, out of these professed religious, are more like, it's not like, serious like doubt of faith or, even like carnal sin. It's really more, I didn't like what my brother or sister did, and that caused me some angst. Okay. And anyway, it's very convicting for yourself. It's like, oh, okay, well, you're hearing these saintly people talk about their spiritual life and their moral life, and it's sort of just like, well, if that's the worst you got.
But the
all right.
problem is, here's like I said in jest, but it's really true. At this age, the really good stuff doesn't come along so much. So,
None of it's really good. I mean, the thing about it though is none of it
well,
is good stuff.
the more fun sins.
What I'm saying is, you hear everything so often, it's just like none of it really kind of surprises you anymore.
But what I'm saying is, congratulations.
Thank you. You got all your cushions.
Oh yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
You missed the band concerts and the vocal concerts.
We were here, learning.
You can come to that and then come here.
He didn't invite us to.
Yeah, I invited everybody. this
And
weekend.
I'm all dirty.
Yeah, I see, he did.
You did. There you
He
go.
did. I heard you. But a little bit more important about-
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
The bands?
Man, now we're getting me in trouble.
Yes, then bands,
Well,
and then worldly pleasure.
well,
I need
I did
instruction
experience,
more.
I did experience the parking.
Yeah, try that.
'Cause I'm
Exactly.
way down the road and of course the one-way street
Yeah, I know.
maze.
Right,
Oh
yeah,
gosh, that's a challenge.
so.
Well, they should
Um,
open the windows so we get hurt.
When we
Oh.
wouldn't have been able to talk.
Yeah, that's true.
Wasn't important enough.
It'll come back. What I wanted to ask
Yeah.
about the gold in the
Canopy.
see, I can't think of any words either. In the canopy above the crucifix, is that
Mm.
the Holy Spirit? Is that representative of the Holy
Well,
Spirit?
there's a dove that's depicted, yes, but the
Oh, I didn't
actual,
notice the
so
dove,
the actual,
so-
that actually is called a ciboria,
Yeah, for it.
and it actually again, it represents a bridal chamber,
Yeah,
right? So every time we go to mass, we're witnessing the wedding feast of the Lamb,
okay.
that Jesus is taking his bride to church.
Because there's no depiction of God the Father with his Santa Claus beard or
Mhm.
something. So, I'm looking for Mary and I'm looking to the crucifix but I was wondering if that, I guess, so that is kind of representative of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I mean, there you see on the top there's a depiction of a dove, and that's always
Yeah.
a symbol of the Holy Spirit.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't notice.
Yeah.
it was a dove,
Usually from
but-
the nave, you probably can see
And
it.
there's no statue of Saint Gabriel.
St. Gabriel is actually depicted in the back on
There's a
the,
painting. or a
yeah, there's a
picture.
painting in the
Oh,
back,
is
yeah,
there?
there's a shrine,
From, Our Lady of
Right.
Guadalupe.
right.
Oh, okay.
And he's also in the front of the church.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah.
come inside.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing. Us handicapped parkers. Well, I had, are you ready to?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, I had a couple questions, but they may be able to wait. But I did want to ask that. Oh, now what about do they have vigil all night long? Do you sign up for that?
Oh, yeah, you can. So now we don't expose Blessed Sacrament, but
I
we
knew
have
that.
we have a group that adoration group that if you want to come in at night, they'll give you a code to get into the electronic
Yeah, we
lock.
need to give that to Helen.
Okay.
She's
well,
always late for.
yeah, they can use that code to get in that door. Well, that door, but even that door, they lock that door with a bolt during mass too at 8 o'clock.
Oh, I know. I've been,
So
locked out.
the electronic lock won't help you with that. if you
Oh,
have a code. Yeah,
okay.
So, but
Oh, that
overnight, yeah,
lock.
but overnight,
yeah.
if you can be given a code by the adoration group and you can come in and pray and do whatever you need to do all that.
Okay, now I have purchased the Liturgy of the Word. Did you see that Bishop Barron
Yeah,
is putting out
Yeah.
monthly books?
yes. Mhm, mhm.
Okay, I have subscribed to that, and I guess I could read what's the last prayer? The
Oh, we're talking Liturgy of the
Compline.
Hours. Liturgy of the
Yeah,
Hours?
yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He's
Compline.
putting out
yeah.
a book for the whole month. So, because you guys have to go from one book to another book to another book, right?
Well, those are
Or do you
seasonal.
cheat?
Those are seasonal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like right now we're on the Easter Lent breviary.
Okay, he's
volume.
putting out one. I'll get my first one in July.
Okay.
And
alright.
it'll have morning, vespers, night,
Or you can just use iBreviary or
online.
Laudate, yeah. They'll
Well,
have the same stuff. The only thing that may be different,
I like books.
the only thing I do too. And the only thing that may be different on those apps though is the hymn. Usually the hymns change.
Okay, but in the month, I mean, they're putting them out. Well,
Well, yeah,
anyway, that's what I
well,
ordered.
the only
It's
thing that
only
be different
$9.
too is sometimes so whether it's memorial or not. So I know iBreviary, I think Laudate is the same thing. They don't do like memorials because the memorials can change from region to region.
Oh, okay.
So that might be different. But for the most part, if you prayed, I mean, you're praying.
Whatever I get,
Yeah, right.
I get. I'm gonna
Like
trust
you
the
won't, so like
bishop.
you're saying, you won't be obligated to do that. I would.
I know, but I kind of try to keep it going.
Yeah,
most of
sure,
The day.
Sure, yeah.
But I saw you online because sometimes I saw you online in the middle of the night. Looked like an empty church doing is it called Compline?
Oh, well,
Was that?
was over
It
Triduum.
Yeah.
and so what I tend to do on like this have been Good Friday
maybe,
into Holy Saturday. So on Good Friday, Holy Saturday, traditionally the church celebrates what they call Tenebrae, which is Latin for darkness. And that actually is a combination of Compline and Matins or
Okay.
Office of Readings. And so
Okay.
that's what I was praying that night.
But was there
always
anybody
traditional.
there?
No,
Or was it just
no,
you?
just me. It's always, I mean, people could come, but the doors are all locked. So, except for if you have the combination lock, you get in the electronic door. So, I started doing that a couple of years ago, and you know it's always it always ends with some kind of noise. It's supposed to symbolize the guards coming to take Jesus away from the Last Supper. Like
So
this
what
commotion.
do you do? Do you
Well,
bring a little-
if you notice on there, I slammed the door in the sacristy like 2 or 3 times.
Oh, no, I didn't notice. I guess
Okay.
I fell asleep.
Okay, that could have been. Because Rob's reads can be very long. It can be very long. And so usually the proper way you celebrate Tenebrae is usually that way on that night.
Okay, in the church, or do you usually
have
do
to.
it in your
Well, so
bedroom? Easy chair.
I could pray it wherever.
Yeah,
Anyone can pray it whatever. But you know, again, we talk about liturgy.
yeah.
Every time the liturgy I was prayed actually is a liturgy. So it's best to do it in what they call common with other people. But that particular night, well, midnight, and was going to come into the church that.
Give me a
evening.
call.
I
I'm
mean,
up at
if you
midnight.
if you're coming through the electronic lock and your key code, you can come in all you want.
Give me a jingle.
But yeah, I've debated opening it up to people and you know generally I don't know how much interest there'd be in that, but I don't know.
You mean like a night prayer type? An
Yeah,
overnight type.
yeah, so it's really so night prayer I pray, and then I pray what we call office of readings, or also called matins, which actually is consistent of there's an invitatory hymn psalm, there's a hymn, there's 3 psalms, then there's these usually longer readings. And the readings that night are actually very interesting because they're all talking about Jesus' descent into hell, right?
Yeah,
And yeah,
that would be a good, food. I didn't get any food last time. Food, faith,
oh, Friends, Food, and Faith,
friends, that was last week.
yeah,
Festivities, no
No
food.
food.
sorry.
It was just me here. I guess I could have, maybe I was supposed to drink. I often thought, I thought one time, maybe I should take turn bringing the food. Oh, you know what we had during Lenten snacks?
Mhm.
They were bear pretzels.
Mhm.
Bear,
Like Del
Just
Sol.
little
Del Sol
old-
did, yeah, right, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I
It's good
said,
practice.
and Marilyn was eating a few and she says, well, I really like them covered with yogurt, but this is Lent. These are Lenten snacks.
I'm trying to
I
get you
don't
guys,
like them.
I'm
I
trying
used
to-
to buy them when I was having company because I would need them afterward.
just trying to get people to heaven. So I'm trying to do. So, sacrifice.
That if I eating those, I'd be a suffering soul. And that's what I said. Somehow we brought up places, retirement places for memory care, you know, but somebody's gonna get killed on one of those things. They have little kids hanging off the
Yeah,
back.
that's crazy.
That some people in memory care and nursing care are not well taken care of. And I said, good. Then I could be a suffering soul. And then I could get there. He'd send me a apostolic thing by mail. Okay, one other thing.
Yeah.
I saw a thing on the internet and it had Padre Pio's name on it.
Mm.
And if you wake up between 12 and 3,
Mhm.
I assume Central Standard Time,
Sure.
that's the time when God will talk to you.
Okay.
Well, you know what? I do every
Yeah.
night. And what God says to me is, hurry up. You have to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
it's a special time,
yeah,
I guess,
yeah.
in the middle of anybody's night.
So again, we always want to kind of look at this from a perspective of what is definitively taught and what is maybe a pious tradition, pious practice, right? So now Padre Pio probably would have said the best time to talk to God is between 12 and 3. Well, okay, is that reality? I mean, or is that just maybe the best time that Padre Pio found to pray to God?
Well,
maybe.
and like they say about cocktails, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Right, yeah,
Well, it's
right.
2 o'clock
So
somewhere too.
I would always, again, we always want to kind of make that distinction between what a pious practice and personal revelation comes
Yeah.
into play and what's been definitively taught by the church. And so those things are not always
Find out.
lined up, right? So in other words, the church doesn't teach, definitively that the only time to pray and God hears you is between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. every
No,
day.
it's just that that's the time he's more likely to talk to you. And it came across
Well,
as,
maybe
he's finished for the day and he's got time to chat.
Maybe it's more the fact, and this may be what Padre Pio was meaning, was that maybe we're better disposed that time to hear what God is telling us.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So there's a difference between those two things, I think. So everyone's a little different, so I think it's always good to keep that in mind. I know that when I will say when I went on my retreat for my 30-day retreat, there was a time where we actually had to wake up in the middle of the night and pray a holy hour. And it was good. It was really kind of more sacrificial in nature. But one of those holy hours was actually a contemplation on hell. And I will say that was the scariest holy hour I've ever had in my life. And it was very interesting. There was a lot of good fruit, but I would not want to do that again.
Well, yeah, but there's so many.
But, okay, so let's
Yeah,
talk
what
about Saint Ignatius for a minute, because I'm still meandering through.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that it's not just a one-time exercise. You return to those weeks
Yeah, you
as
can.
needed.
You can. So like for the formation of a Jesuit, for instance, right? They were required to go on a 30-day retreat in their formation. And that's it. That one time. Now they may go multiple times if they so desire in their priesthood, but that has to be discerned with their provincial, right? So in other words, they can't just like leave ministry, whatever. But typically they go once and that's it. Now, anyone can go on a retreat, 30-day retreat, multiple times they feel that they actually can afford
I've
it and
never
are
heard of a
desired.
30-day retreat.
It's part of the spiritual exercise of Ignatius Loyola.
So is it something that you choose to do or you are obligated to do
Yeah.
on a regular basis?
So choose. So I'm not required. I wasn't required to go on a 30-day retreat, but so when I came to seminary formation, every summer in seminary formation, you have options to whether it be apostolics, whether it be spiritual growth. The option I was given that particular summer was I can go down to Georgia as a life team missionary and work with the kids, high school kids down there for the entire summer. Or I can go on a 30-day silent retreat in South
And it
Dakota.
was silent.
So it's silent. Yes. No unnecessary talking. Meals are in silence. You're required to, you discern with your spiritual director what the best way to engage in the retreat would be. Most people pray about 4 to 5 holy hours a day. In addition, you have mass, adoration time.
And when you say holy hour, is it the whole 9 yards 5 times?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Not
these
the
holy hours
prayers at the hour.
in the retreat, these holy hours are they're directed towards a particular theme or goal, right? So every day there'll be a different, like, okay, today we're going to focus on the creation, right? And so for those 5 holy hours, there's a step process how you engage in the holy hour, and it's directed towards that gift of creation, right? Every hour, right? 5 hours. And again, it's up to your spiritual director, and you kind of discern what the best way to do that would be, maybe the best place to do that, what time to do that. But as long as you do it, that's kind of the idea. And every day is kind of, there's something different. Now, if you get farther in the retreat, the days start reflecting on particular aspects of the life of Jesus. So like the second week, you may focus on Jesus's birth. The third week, you may focus on like Jesus's ministry. I'm sorry, second week, Jesus' ministry. Third week, you focus on the passion, death, and resurrection. And the fourth, you kind of focus on the after the resurrection. Right? So there's kind of step that way and kind of structured that way. Ignatius actually was a very structured person.
Yes,
Yes,
incredibly.
and so it's funny because you're trying to you think of like the spiritual life as something being rather ethereal and not this kind of like, you go with the flow or you kind of open all these different things. But Ignatius takes a very structured, regimented approach
Line
to it.
upon
Right,
line.
exactly.
Yeah.
He
was military.
he
too,
was
so
a soldier.
He was
Yes,
trained
right.
in that
right.
thought process
Yes.
anyway.
Which I found very helpful as like an engineer, as an analytic person, because it was like, okay, I can follow this and make it work. So again, but there's different spiritual schools out there, but the 30-day retreat is really Ignatian, as far as he developed that for his brothers to grow in their spiritual life in ministry to what they were going to be doing.
Okay, the contemplating hell was your assignment in the middle of the night?
Well, so certain
Or
days and certain
Was it the
meditations.
whole day?
No, certain meditations and contemplations. He's very clear he wants that to be done at certain times of the day, and not just for that one, but there are other ones where you were asked to wake up in the middle of the night and go to the chapel or find a place or maybe in your room, whatever, and pray that hour based on that guided meditation.
Okay, so it's a guided meditation
It is,
about
it
hell, or do
is.
you have to imagine
so-
personally what
okay,
it would
so
be like for yourself?
The way that Ignatius looks at contemplation is it's basically a form of imaginative prayer. So he's very big on putting yourself in the place.
That's
and
what I've been trying to
experiencing
do
that, right?
with the mysteries.
Yeah. So in other words, so when we're talking about like something like hell, what Ignatius suggests is you imagine what hell looks like and smells like and tastes like and feels like.
Mhm.
And then once you have that established, you then put yourself in this meditation, you actually go there.
Mhm.
Now, I think I shared this before, but one thing that really scared the hell out of me was all through those days, I was putting myself, and it was almost like a who is the Dante effect, right? So I was being kind of guided, right? And I never saw who the guide was. I assumed it was Jesus. And it wasn't until the very last hour that I realized that it wasn't.
So in your
In my, in my imagine,
that Jesus was the
in
guy,
my imaginative
because
prayer,
he took Faustina, he took or Mary took the children.
mhm.
Okay. 'Cause-
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, he took Faustina to hell.
Yeah, right, yes, yeah, so
And,
he's done it with other saints before,
and
right?
she actually went to purgatory a few times.
Right.
To,
Now here's the
for
thing,
somebody
the
else's
the
sins.
meditation doesn't like actually direct you who to imagine who's doing this for you.
but, okay.
And what kind of shook me about this particular meditation, and this was really probably the scariest part. I've never been more scared in my life. Was that I realized after at the last meditation in the evening, and it was probably about halfway through the contemplation, that it wasn't Jesus leading me through these things. And I actually, at that moment, called out to Christ, and he came. But I realized that because I never actually saw who was guiding me. I heard voices. I didn't feel any prodding, but I heard this kind of voice calling and directing me through these levels of hell and revealing these things to me. But it wasn't Jesus.
Well, but, who was the woman who was sitting here?
Evelyn?
No, Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen. Oh, yeah, I think she was in one of the groups before. Mary Ellen said something about tarot cards and
Yeah,
the Ouija board
right.
was what caused that kid.
Yep, yeah, The Exorcist. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so contemplating hell deeply,
Hmm.
isn't that, I mean, do you think that just brought you so close?
Well, I think.
You
Well,
could've
here's the
been
thing.
grabbed.
Well, here's so in order. Okay, the thing about that though is, when it comes to these things, using those things is a willful act,
Yeah,
right? So contemplating hell wouldn't necessarily be is a willful act. I'm doing that, but I'm doing that under the auspices and the protection of either my guardian angel or
Yeah, 'cause
Jesus
there are
himself,
several
right?
prayers that
Right.
say, As you're
Exactly,
beginning.
right. So in
Yeah.
other words, yeah, there is now if I were to maybe go further in that and let whoever that person was deeper into myself, sure.
but that's why it was so scary.
But that
because you were so
exactly, but that's also
close.
where the grace came in these prayers
Right.
that was protecting me from that. And but it took me to realize at that point to realize, oh, this isn't Jesus. And then I called out to him and he came.
I wonder if the whole body of the retreat ended up doing the same thing. Did you? But you didn't have time to. You didn't.
We don't,
have
yeah,
opportunity
we
to
don't, so
talk
that's the
about
thing,
it.
we don't talk to anybody else about those things. Like
Yeah.
even during the retreat, there's these days called reprieve days, meaning
Uh-huh.
it's basically okay, the rules are lifted, you can go out and do whatever you want.
Oh,
You can talk to people, well, yeah, that kind of stuff. But one rule they tell you is don't talk about what's going on with you in the retreat. Right?
But how often were you in touch with your spiritual director?
Oh, every day.
Okay, so you
every
got to kind of
sure.
offload
Oh, yeah, of
that.
course. We talked, yeah, of course. We talked about that for sure.
Did I'm sure it was, I guess it was did he say that means you really did it well, or that's
Well, it's not
common?
like doing well or bad. It's more like
But I mean,
what
that you
did
were
you
deep
learn?
in
What
it.
has been given to you in that,
Yeah.
right? What was the
did you
gift you
discover?
received? Yeah, yeah, right. And yeah, so there's really more discussing the fruit of it, whether it was good fruit or bad fruit, right? That's what was the point of the spiritual direction. It
And you
wasn't
felt
about,
it was good for you.
oh, I think it was. Because I think it reminded me that the evil one not only exists, but also he's got a plan.
Yeah,
Right.
see, I didn't really believe a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I have not yet memorized the prayer to Saint Michael, but the end where it says, however it
Yeah,
says,
the
lead
spirits of
souls.
the well of the month,
Yeah,
look at the room of
and-
souls.
It's all about the
And see,
world.
Right, right.
This is another, funny is not the word, strange, unique, amazing, but in just the gist of a day, any day, I will be brought up against a wall
Mhm.
and I have to literally look inside myself and ask, okay, who am I paying attention to?
Right.
And who am I gonna follow?
Right.
And that is mind blowing because I've never paid attention to that degree of my thoughts, of my words,
Yeah.
of my
Yeah.
actions.
Yes. And that's one thing, and to that point, Kate, that's one thing that really I realized, because before that retreat, I wouldn't consider myself a contemplative, right? I didn't really have a desire to, like, do meditative prayer. My prayer life was basically, I had the rote prayers I memorized, and go to mass and that kind of stuff. But I was fearing that because, like, oh man, I don't know if I'm really I'm really designed that way.
Yeah,
What that retreat opened me to was the fact that I could do it, and I could receive the good things in it, but also have things revealed to me that I was not aware before.
And that's where I get scared.
It is scary, right? It is, because,
That's
like,
where
oh, shoot.
I am like,
But when my spiritual director, and this is what my spiritual director told me in this, is like, look, this is a great opportunity for you to rely on the grace of God. And we put in that perspective, was like, oh yeah, oh good, okay, good. This was a gift. And that's why that was that retreat, and what makes Ignatius so hard. And not just Ignatius, but I mean, I think you see this in many spiritual schools in the Catholic Church. It's looking at suffering not as a burden, but as a gift given you by God. To the point where we should actually desire it rather than try to avoid it.
rather than think I've got enough right now.
Yeah. Which is,
Yes, I do. I
which is
do.
difficult, because that's an opportunity for us to conform to the cross and gain that grace to merit in heaven.
Well, that helps. That helps me a lot
Yeah.
because I am in agony with losing that building,
Sure.
losing the artwork that I loved. I mean, well, the guy that I'm working with just to get my stuff out of there, it was vandalized. It was destroyed by water, and we're finding 10 inches of dirt.
Oh, wow.
There's dirt in the drawers. It's very, very bizarre and very, I'm gonna lose it. And yeah, so I'm trying to get